Story 1: The Broken Sky. "Please excuse me if my writing seems a little sloppy," he began wearily. "It's been such a long time since I got anything resembling a good night's sleep, and I feel like my entire brain is trying to shut down out of sheer desperation for some rest. I honestly don't know what sharing my story will achieve, but there's nothing else I can do now except offer what little knowledge I have. Although my troubles started about a year ago, the real beginning stretched much further back, about 20 years ago, when I was just a young boy. I had this vivid memory of a nightmare. In it, I was woken up in the middle of the night by this bizarre noise coming from outside. It was like a deep, booming, pulsing sound, one that penetrated right to your very bones. I remember looking out of the window and noting that the sky seemed what I can only describe as broken. I suddenly felt this compulsion to walk downstairs, where I found the rest of my family, still in their nightwear in the dark living room, standing in total silence in front of the TV, which bathed them in an eerie blue glow. On the screen was a man who seemed to be giving some kind of address. I don't remember what he said, but something about him and the way his face moved made me feel really uncomfortable, like I wanted to get away from him as quickly as possible, but instead I stood there, transfixed by the screen. From the corner of my eye, I could see our 2 dogs cowering behind the large armchair, growling at the man on the TV. Finally, the man seemed to issue some kind of command before the screen was replaced with a symbol, one I didn't recognize, but that felt strangely familiar. Then we all turned around in unison, still in absolute silence, and went back to bed, but not before my father, for some unknown reason, unlocked the front door. As I returned to my room, I felt like I wasn't in control of my body, more like a passenger being taken on a journey. I looked briefly out of the window, and to my horror, I noticed dozens of elongated figures dragging and crawling their way down the street, making their way up to all the houses and entering through the unlocked doors. I climbed into bed under the crushing horror that my father had unlocked our door, and that these things would soon be making their way into our home. I lay there as I heard them drag themselves up the path to our door, followed by hands scratching and fumbling at the handle, which slowly creaked open. I heard them enter the house and begin to climb the stairs. Then I remember waking up the following morning. The nightmare haunted me for weeks, but for some reason I didn't want to tell anybody about it, and eventually I pretty much forgot all about it. That is, until a year ago, when I was reading an Ask Reddit thread about the scariest dreams people had ever had. I remembered my nightmare about the TV man, and I was considering posting it when, as I scrolled down the thread, I was stunned by someone who had posted the exact same dream. As I read the details, which were so vivid, I felt like I was reliving that night. I was overcome with nausea, felt like I would collapse, almost like an anxiety attack. She described everything, the noise, the broken sky, which she called glitched, the man on the TV, and even the crawling figures entering the house after her mother had unlocked the door. Beneath her post were several more replies with people stating that they remembered having the same dream. My mouth went dry and my heart raced. I decided to get a glass of water and calm my nerves before posting a reply to share my experience. But when I returned from the kitchen a few minutes later and refreshed the page to check for new replies, I found the post and all the replies had been deleted. Luckily, I had managed to click on the girl's username before everything disappeared. This was the first time I'd seen anyone else with this same experience, and I wanted to find out everything I could. I planned on digging through her comment history to see if any more light could be shed on this. However, when I got to her profile, there was nothing. No posts, no comments, no indication that the profile had actually been used. I decided to go out on a limb and message her, hoping this wouldn't be another dead end. I kept the message short and simple, explaining that I'd had the exact same dream when I was younger, and I was really hoping to find out more. I got a reply almost immediately. When I read it, my stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" she wrote. "I don't remember posting anything about anything like that." I typed back urgently, "The dream, you know, the one about the glitched sky and the loud noise and the creatures. You just wrote about it." There were a ton of people who replied saying they had the same dream. This reply didn't come nearly as fast as the first one, but when it did, I almost wished it hadn't. "No," she responded, "they are watching. I'll see you soon." "What the hell is going on?" I exclaimed aloud to myself. I started to panic, my chest tightening. I felt dizzy and confused. Who are they? Why had it all been deleted? And most importantly, who was coming to see me? Instead of replying back, I shut my computer down and tried to lie down. I thought maybe a nap would help me feel better, clear my head enough to think this through logically. After I'd buried myself under my blankets, I heard the doorbell ring. Something deep in my body warned me not to answer it. I shrugged the blankets off and stared at the door of my apartment, not 20 feet away. I was in the living room on the couch with a perfect view of the door. The light outside allowed me to see the shadow of someone standing there, waiting. Their shadow swayed back and forth slowly, like they were bouncing from one foot to another. After remembering the dream, I was very hesitant to open the door. There was no way it could be her. We'd only spoken moments ago. "They are watching." Those words had made me paranoid. Instead, I decided to wait them out. They didn't wait long. The door handle jiggled and tried to turn. Whoever was on the other side grew frustrated and pulled hard, but couldn't open the door. My television suddenly turned on, a pale blue background and a table appearing immediately on the screen. "Unlock the door," a voice commanded from off-screen. I shut my eyes and buried my head in response. The door handle rattled with ferocity. Then the radio turned on in the kitchen. I saw the dial automatically turn until it reached AM 9:30. "Unlock the door," the voice enunciated from the radio speakers. I cowered again. The voice filled me with paralyzing fear, and I could tell it was getting angry. Still, the door handle rattled and jangled in all directions, desperately trying to come in. When I turned away from the radio, I saw the window. The sky was hazy, distorted, broken, like a shattered television screen that refused to die. I became aware of the slow thump that emanated from the windows every few seconds. Thump, thump, thump. It was like background noise that drowned itself out when you didn't focus on it. I was determined this time to have proof, to be certain I could show the world what was happening. From my pocket, I extracted my cell phone. Unlocking it, I pressed the camera icon and aimed it at the window. Before I could press the button to take the picture, my screen took on the same hazy appearance as the sky, before switching to the pale blue background and the table. This time, a man was sitting there. I recognized him immediately, more by feeling than by sight. His hair was a mess, as if a young kid had cut a balding man's hair. It was out of place, stuck out in all directions. There were more patches of skin than hair. The man's face was difficult to comprehend. It was in 3 places at once, and always moving. He didn't have 3 separate faces, but it was like his head was moving so quickly that he could appear and reappear in multiple places. "Unlock the door," he whispered, staring directly into my eyes. My body took control then. I tried to scream, but my muscles wouldn't respond. Instead, I was lifted off the couch and began shuffling toward the door. My phone was left behind on the floor. I tried to fight, but once again I was a passenger in my own body. Whoever was at the door had stopped trying to get in, as if it knew I was coming, as if it knew I couldn't resist. My hand rested on the tiny locked handle that separated man from monster. My thumb and forefinger pinched the lock and turned. Calmly, my body turned around and walked away from the unlocked door. I heard the handle click open, and the door creaked slowly. A single large footstep fell behind me. I wanted to spin around and see what it was, but I couldn't. My body kept marching forward into the house while that thing crept in behind me, always staying out of sight. Two grey, emaciated hands suddenly came into my field of view as the thing reached around to grab me. There were only 3 abnormally long fingers on each hand, and the bones looked like they might break through the skin at any moment. I finally managed to scream, and my body allowed me to spin around and face it. I woke with a start, sweating profusely and screaming at the top of my lungs. My blankets were tangled around me on the couch, and my phone was on the floor, right where I'd left it in my dream. I looked at the window. The skies were clear. The TV was off. So was the radio. Cautiously, I got up to check the door. It was unlocked. I opened it and was greeted by a 20-something guy in a football jersey and shorts, his hand just about to knock. I shrieked from the shock of seeing him, and he was just as taken aback. He clearly wanted something from me because he didn't run away. After I'd calmed down some, I demanded, "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" "We chatted on Reddit about the dream," he replied matter-of-factly, as if I should just overlook his obvious lie about being the opposite gender, not to mention how quickly he'd gotten over the fright just now. I didn't trust him, and how had he found me anyway? I realized I must have been too lax about what I'd put up on that blasted website. Too late now, I supposed. He's already here, and I'm much too curious, and a bit desperate for answers. "You are you?" I eyed him suspiciously, not even trying to hide my doubts. "Well, we'll talk out here, I guess, where people can see. Don't try any funny business." All right," he stammered. Good. If he was off guard, at least he wouldn't have the upper hand if he tried anything suspicious. "Tell me what you know, please," I urged. "I'm racking my mind over all this. And that last message of yours, you really freaked me out, dude." My tired eyes must have been apparent, and my voice was a bit hoarse. I'd just gotten up, and from that awful dream. I grabbed my keys and followed him out the door, locking it behind me. I tried to ignore the thought that it might not be locked when I got back. I trailed him down the stairs at a distance so I could keep my eye on him. I didn't trust this guy yet. We walked into the parking lot of my building, and the sun was shining brightly. "Is this good enough for you?" he asked. "I don't want to go too far." Calmly, my body turned around and walked away from the unlocked door. I heard the handle click open, and the door creaked slowly. A single, large footstep fell behind me. I wanted to spin around and see what it was, but I couldn't. My body kept marching forward into the house while that thing crept in behind me, always staying out of sight. I shifted uncomfortably and looked around. A man was walking his dog around the complex, and a couple was arranging things in a moving van. "I guess this is fine enough," I muttered, "as long as he isn't in my home." "You had another dream last night, didn't you?" he asked lowly. "How did you know?" I whispered. He shrugged. "You're pale, and your eyes are cloudy. Plus, I had one too." "What is happening?" I whispered shakily. He sat down on the curb and put his head in his hands. "They know that we remember," he said grimly, "and they aren't happy about it. They are always watching us." I joined him on the curb. I eyed the people milling around to make sure they weren't within earshot. Still, I kept my voice quiet. "Who are they?" The dude in the jersey just laughed maniacally. "I'm not the right person to ask," he replied. "There's more of us, you know. People who can see, I mean. There's this guy who calls himself Mikey. He knows the most. He's supposed to contact you." "And what's your name?" I pressed. "Call me whatever you want," he said dismissively. "It doesn't matter much." "None of this is making sense," I grumbled. My mind was spinning. "It all will tonight," Jersey smiled. and I could have sworn that his face flickered a bit. I looked away from him and concentrated on the cracks in the gravel. Looking at him for too long made me feel uneasy. "Tonight?" I finally asked. Jersey stood up and brushed something off his pants. "Everyone is going to meet up," he explained. "Mikey thinks that the event is coming soon. We have to stop it." He made "event" sound like a proper noun, and my stomach rolled. "Event?" I echoed. "The dream, remember?" He continued. "The man on the TV, the figures in the street. It wasn't a dream. It was a memory. It only seemed like a dream because when you woke up, everything was normal. No one remembered. That's what they want. They don't want us to remember." I suddenly felt lightheaded. There was that they again. "What are they doing?" I demanded. "What are we not supposed to be remembering?" "Tonight, friend," he said cryptically. "It will all be over. Tonight." Cryptic. Just what I needed. "There's a plan?" I asked. "Mikey says it will all be over," he repeated. I couldn't help but notice how monotone he sounded, as if he'd rehearsed this conversation many times. Or maybe he'd just had to have it hundreds of times with others like me. "When and where?" I pressed. "Mikey will contact you soon," he assured me. "Stay inside with the door locked until you hear from him." I stood up, and he and I silently made our way back to the stairs that led up to my apartment. "Will you be there?" I asked. "We all will be," Jersey smiled. "Stay safe." I walked up the one flight of stairs alone while he watched me from the ground. I felt more confused than ever, and I suddenly felt exhausted. I stopped short of my door when I noticed that it was slightly ajar. I looked back to the bottom of the stairs to call out to the mysterious guy, but he was gone, almost as if he'd just disappeared. I walked into my living room slowly and quietly. My one-bedroom apartment was silent and empty, but I knew that I still wasn't safe. I took Jersey's advice and locked the door. I sat on my couch in my dimly lit living room until I heard my phone buzz. I looked, and I had a message on Reddit. "Hi mate, Mikey here," it read. "Meeting at Redacted at 5:30. That was it? That was the message I was supposed to wait for? I felt annoyed and confused, but I got up to get ready anyway. 5:30 was only a couple hours away when the sun started to set. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the meeting place. I checked my phone and it was 5:20. I also had 3 missed calls, one from my brother and 2 more from an unknown number that I couldn't stomach answering. My body was trembling with nervous anticipation. The meeting place was an old, abandoned building. It used to be a Walmart, but it closed down when the town started sprouting neighborhood Walmarts. The sun was sinking low into the sky, and the world was tinged in pink. My heart started racing when a figure walked from the building. He emerged from the shadows and into the fading light. It was Jersey, but he'd traded his jersey and shorts for a pair of dark jeans and a black hoodie. What? Was I supposed to call him Hoodie now? He smiled and waved me toward him. I was just about to get out of the car when my phone started to buzz. It was the unknown number. Something in my gut told me to answer it this time. "Who is this?" I barked. "Hi, sorry." A girl's voice whispered on the other end. "Who is this?" I asked again, more gently. The girl sucked in a deep, shaky breath. "This is redacted from Reddit," she said. "We messaged the other night about my comment, about our dream." My stomach turned to ice. I gazed out my windshield at Jersey, who was still beckoning me. His smile seemed to falter a bit. I was trembling so badly I nearly dropped my phone. "Excuse me," I asked into the phone. "We can't talk over the internet or text," she warned urgently. "It's too dangerous. We have to meet, right now." "But I already met you," I whispered. She was silent for several painful moments before finally saying, "I don't know who you met, but it wasn't me." Jersey was walking toward me now. I stared in horror as the smile fell from his lips, and he started running. I spun on my heels and began to run. I could hear the footsteps pounding on the concrete behind me, but I used to be on the athletics team back in school, and soon I could hear his footsteps begin to fade with distance. As I turned a corner and began to make my way back to the relative safety of the street, my phone began to vibrate. Trying not to slow down, I fumbled in my pocket and pulled it out, and was greeted by a blue screen. I froze to the spot. On the screen was a symbol, and even though I couldn't remember it clearly, I knew it was the icon from my dreams. I was glued to the spot and could hear the footsteps behind me once more, but this time they were slow and calm. When Jersey was no more than 5 feet away, he instructed me to put the phone to my ear, which I instinctively did. I could hear a strange tone emanate from the speaker and what sounded like words, even though I couldn't tell what it was saying, or at least not consciously, because as soon as the noise stopped, I began to walk toward the road. Once more, I was not in control of my body. Instead, I felt like I was trapped inside a flesh marionette, and someone unseen was pulling strings toward an unknown goal. I stopped at the edge of the pavement and turned to see a bus making its way toward me. I could feel the muscles in my legs begin to tighten, and I realized with horror that I was about to jump in front of it. From my right, I heard the screeching of tires and a door slide open, and as I began to lunge forward, I was tackled to the ground by 2 men, who pulled the phone from my hand and threw it into the road before dragging me into the back of a van, slamming the door shut and quickly speeding off. I was so stunned by the series of events that it took me about a minute to realize I was able to move once again. I looked around the van and could see the silhouette of 3 figures around me, and as my eyes tried desperately to adjust to the darkness, a female voice broke the silence. "Calm down," she said soothingly. "You're safe with us." It was the same voice from the unknown caller. She turned to 2 more figures sitting in the front of the van and signaled for the driver to pull over. We stopped by the side of a quiet road, and a small light was turned on, allowing me to see my rescuers. 2 young men sat in the front. The driver was a stocky guy in his mid-20s with a buzz cut and a serious face that looked fresh from the military. He eyed me cautiously, while the guy in the passenger seat, a kid of about 19 wearing a baseball cap and a rough attempt at facial hair, gave me a huge grin. Behind me was another man, looking to be in his late 30s with a shaved head and a stern demeanor. He looked quite big, the kind of guy who wouldn't look out of place standing in the doorway of a busy club. Finally, kneeling to my left, was a young woman in her early 20s whose dark blonde hair was tied back in a long ponytail, except for a few messy strands that hung down either side of her face, framing a pair of square-rimmed glasses. She gave me a reassuring smile. I tried to stammer a few words out. Like so many questions were fighting for the door that the only words that managed to squeeze through were, "Who are you?" The grinning kid piped up excitedly, "Well, I'm Fred. The big guy is Scooby, that's Velma, and the doofus next to me is Daphne." The driver turned and punched him hard in the arm before turning back to me. "I'm Matt," he said flatly. "This is my asshole of a brother, Jake. That's Mason behind you, and she's Katie." Katie looked down at me. "You look pretty rough," she observed gently, "but you'll be fine after a good night's rest. I wouldn't suggest heading back to your place because I'm guessing they already know where you live. Instead, you can head back with us. We've got a place just outside of the city where we can fill you in and try to prepare you as best we can." "Prepare me for what?" I asked nervously. Jake yelled excitedly, "We've finally got proof! We're gonna expose them! Let the whole world know what's really happening." I was more confused than ever. "Expose who?" I demanded. "What's happening?" Katie put her hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry about that now," she reassured me. "We'll fill you in back at the house. Tell you everything we know." I laid my head back on the floor of the van. My head was filled with unanswered questions, but I was so exhausted that I relished the chance to just stop for a short while. Something about this group reassured me and made me feel safe, even though I had no idea what was going on. But something began to bother me as I lay in silence, and after a few minutes, I spoke up. "How did you find me?" I asked. "How did you know where I was?" Katie looked at me, puzzled. "You messaged me last night," she explained. "Told me to meet you outside the old Walmart at 5:30. Confused, I began to reply, stating that I never sent any such message, when I suddenly paused and realized that last night was when I'd had the dream again. Katie's face went from a look of bemusement to one of horror. Oh God!" she gasped. "You lured us here." With rising panic in her voice, she turned to Matt and yelled, "Get us out of here!" He started the engine, but before he could get the van moving, the vehicle was filled with a blinding light. There was no time to react, as my ears were filled with a deafening cacophony of noise, before the entire world seemed to collapse beneath me, and I was swallowed by darkness. I awoke in a hospital bed. The doctors told me I'd been in a medically induced coma for about 5 days. They said I was lucky to be alive, but that my friends were not so fortunate. A truck had veered off the road and smashed into the van head-on. Apparently the truck driver said he didn't understand it. He'd always been a careful driver, but that evening he suddenly got distracted by his cell phone, which was on the dashboard. And before he realized what was happening, he'd veered out of his lane and straight into us. Matt and Jake had been killed instantly. Mason was still alive but in a coma, and the doctors suspected massive brain damage, so much so that even if he did wake up, he would be barely able to function. Katie had suffered severe internal injuries, and despite the best efforts to save her, had died in the ambulance. I was the lucky one, with only broken ribs, a shattered leg, a spinal fracture, and a collapsed lung. As I said, lucky. I was in the hospital for a long time, and I have never felt so scared or vulnerable in my entire life. Every night I was certain that someone was going to come and finish the job. Maybe a nurse would mistakenly give me a lethal dose of medication. Maybe one of the surgeons working on my spine would slip with a scalpel and slice through something important. Maybe a member of my family would accidentally spill something deadly into my drink. The wait for my inevitable demise was agonizing, with everyone who entered my room a possible assassin. But it never came. Eventually, after months of surgery and physiotherapy, I was discharged and able to walk again, albeit with a cane. As soon as I had the chance, I gathered whatever money I could and told my family that my near-death experience had put things in perspective, and that I was going to travel. I loaded everything I could fit into the back of my car and hit the road. The truth was that I was running as fast as I could. I didn't know where I was running to, or what I was running from, but I had to keep moving, and that's what I've been doing ever since. I try to find others who have had the dream, but they are getting harder and harder to find. Maybe there aren't many of them, maybe someone else is getting to them first, but every now and again, someone will message me, telling me to come and meet them somewhere. I don't, because I know they've just had a dream. Story 2. The Dream That Wouldn't End. I'm really sorry if any of this is incoherent. I've not slept for longer than a couple of hours at a time for nearly 5 days, and as a sleep scientist, I can tell you now that this is wrecking my clarity of thought, speed of reaction, emotional well-being, psychological stability, intellectual processing, and even my quality of digestion and strength of immune system. I know exactly how ruinous not getting enough sleep can be, but I'm still too afraid to sleep. I work in a sleep laboratory connected to a barely mid-tier university that, thanks to a generous parental endowment following the suicide of an insomniac student, has an incredibly well-funded sleep science department. We attract leading researchers in the field, despite the university's numerous drawbacks. I transferred here at the beginning of the new academic year, and we launched a series of experiments focused around lucid dreaming. At this point, for non-experts, I should probably explain what lucid dreaming is. Your sleep is split into two different kinds, deep sleep and dream sleep, known as REM, rapid eyeball movement, sleep, because, well, that's what your eyeballs are doing. During deep sleep, your brain waves are slow, regular, relaxed. During REM dream sleep, your brain waves are almost identical to your waking brain waves. Most people don't realize that they are dreaming until they wake up. However bizarre, frightening, or glorious dreams are, they feel real until it turns out that they aren't. But a small percentage of people are aware they are dreaming, and can even use this knowledge to control what happens in the dream. These people are known as lucid dreamers. We'd set up an experiment in our lab using 7 self-declared lucid dreamers from the student community. Of the 7, 4 of them turned out to be exaggerating their actually non-existent lucid dreaming abilities. We do have ways of checking this. The remaining 3 didn't provide a big enough control group to gain credible results, but they'd proved themselves genuine lucid dreamers, so we thought we'd run this as an early version of the experiment to iron out the kinks, and then go bigger next year when our funding was renewed. Our aim, to see if we could reproduce the same narrative in every dream again and again, and so isolate the parts of the brain that say things like, for example, opens a door, talks to a person, eats a cake. Eventually, perhaps many decades down the line, we'd know both how to read dreams and even create them. At this stage, our narrative was simple. It went like this. First, as soon as you are aware that you are dreaming, you need to move to a room of your creation. If you are currently in a room, open a door and step into that room. If you are outside, create a building and enter it. Second, in the room there will be a table set for tea with 2 seats. Third, sit down on one of the chairs. Pour yourself a cup of tea. Drink the tea. Fourth, pour a cup of tea for the empty space. Do not drink this tea. Fifth, signal to the duty scientists running the experiment that you have completed all the above steps using a pre-arranged signal. Again, we do have ways of monitoring this. And go about the rest of your dream as you please. On the first night, things went very well. Patient A, South Asian male, age 20, in excellent health, completed the necessary steps and apparently went out flying afterwards. Patient B, white female, aged 25, in good health, apparently began the dream having sex with Rita Hayworth, had to apologize and explain she was late for a meeting before creating the door in the room, and went right back to her afterwards. Patient C, mixed black and white female, aged 20, in good health, also completed the necessary steps, and then, out of idle interest, let the dream take over to see where it would take her. The second night, too, went past without trouble. Notably, patient B started by dreaming about sex with Marilyn Monroe. I hope it won't break patient confidentially to reveal she was a postgraduate student in the film and media department. It wasn't until the third night that we started to have trouble. Our patients all sleep in a long, wide dormitory, with each bed fenced off from the others by means of a set of movable panels, so they have their own little capsule. We were hoping to build a series of small single rooms once the funding was renewed. They are hooked up to electrodes that monitor bodily functions and brain waves and filmed with an unobtrusive night vision camera, so we can observe them from the control room without needing to disturb them. Patient C, our most efficient lucid dreamer, she reached REM sleep with comparatively little prior deep sleep, woke up midway through an REM cycle. Woke up is quite a gentle term for what happened. Her whole torso jerked up from the bed as if she'd been stabbed in the back, and she brought herself round with a strangled scream. Then she sat up in the bed and started to sob. I was running the lab that night, and I went pelting down to her capsule. I was concerned about her well-being, yes, but I also didn't want her to wake up the other 2 patients. I helped her out of the bed. She'd started to weep quietly. I am not totally hard of heart, and I draped my hoodie over her and led her up to the control room. "He wouldn't leave," she kept moaning. "It's okay, it's okay," I kept muttering in response. When I got her up to the control room, I sent one of the postdocs to get a cup of non-caffeinated tea and asked her what had happened. Patient C shuddered deeply. In the room, the tea room, there was a man. What was he doing? He was sitting there in the other space. I am not a lucid dreamer. If I had dreamed a man sitting at a table, I'd thank any listening deities for not sending me the anxiety dream where I come home to find my ex has partially eaten my cat. So I said, "I guess anything can seem threatening when you're in a nightmare." Patient C, tear-blotched as she was, looked up at me with astonishing sharpness. "I don't have nightmares," she said, slowly and deliberately. "I can control my dreams. That's why you picked me. Except he wouldn't leave." She paused, closed her eyes, swallowed, then said, much more quietly, "And he looked at me, and his eyes, they were just. He looked at me, and I could feel he wanted me to fucking die." At this point, the monitors for patient A started flashing. Patient A was spasming in his bed. I went running back down to the dormitory, knocking into the tea-fetching postdoc on the way. By the time I got to patient A, his screams had already woken up patient B, who was opening the panel of her capsule and sleepily asking what was going on. I pulled the panels back on their grooves, grabbed patient A and shook him hard. I shouldn't have done that, it was unprofessional, but I was unnerved. Patient A, as he came to terrible consciousness, was screaming, "You're not there! You're not there! You can't hurt me! You can't hurt me! You're not there! You can't hurt me!" He was screaming it like someone who was in nerve-shredding agony. Patient A had had the same dream as patient C, except that, after the unknown man had refused to leave, patient A had poured him a cup of tea and started cracking some jokes. He said that the man's face had concentrated into an expression of poisonous hatred, and A had started to feel uncomfortable, not scared, but actual physical discomfort, as if he'd run a marathon and was fighting for breath. He'd apparently made some other crack to the man about opening a window, and the faint discomfort became agonizing. As A started to struggle to breathe, the man, his face still twisted with fury, had started to bleed. A was watching this woundless bloodbath and starting to suffocate when I shook him awake. B had seen nothing of the sort. "Lauren Bacall," she murmured apologetically when quizzed. But A and C gave us descriptions of the man, and they matched. About 21 years old, cheeks marred with rosacea. Well, crazy ruddy, according to C, blotchy red looked bad, according to A, limp, greasy hair, bloodshot eyes, deep shadows underneath them, a crooked front tooth, pouchy belly visible beneath stained t-shirt, face exhausted and full of hatred. I'm sorry to say the primary reaction of the lab was buzzing excitement. It seemed we'd managed to create a shared figure, perhaps dredged from the primal depths of the human unconsciousness, using our skeleton dream narrative. The lab supervisor, my direct line manager, insisted we run the experiment for a 4th night. Patients A, B, and C were trepidatious, but everything looks better in the daylight, doesn't it? So night 4 began. I wasn't there. You see, sleep scientists know a lot about sleep, and as a result, it is considered unethical to deprive scientists working in the lab of proper circadian rhythm-based sleep for longer than 3 nights. I wrote my thesis on the health dangers of night shift work. My dad was a night shift worker and had died in his early 50s. much too young. So I went home to my cat and my enormous apartment, which I could afford because the funding for the department is so substantial. It pays decent salaries. Good, even. Good salaries in British academia. I hope this might explain why, when I found out what I did, when what happened to me happened, I didn't quit on the spot. I went to bed. I dreamed. I dreamed about shopping for rainbow paint at a hardware store. It was the latest thing on Instagram. I hated it. But my ex, who for some reason was no longer my ex, was insistent we paint my apartment with it. In my dream, I wandered up to a store employee with an IG picture on my phone. "Hey, excuse me," I mumbled, "but I'm trying to find that paint that comes out of the tin as a rainbow. Pastel, preferably. Sorry." The employee turned around and fixed me with an expression of the deepest, purest hatred. Sallow skin with blossoming circles of red, wretched, pouchy eyes. A snarl that revealed a single crooked tooth. I turned and ran. You know what that means in a dream. I turned and I started to move excruciatingly slowly through what felt like treacle. Behind me, a noise that sounded like a short, barked laugh, with no humor and with so much disgust I could feel my skin pimpling under its pressure. The man walked around me and stood in front of me. That's what I'll always remember. Everything else was obeying dream logic. The weird, super soft fluorescent lighting that came from nowhere, the misty vagueness of the shelving, the gooey slowness of my limbs. But the man in my dream moved with the simple briskness of a real person. Blood was bubbling up from his lower eyelid. There was blood coming out of his ears, blood dripping off his fingers from a source under his sleeves. I was still trying to treacle run, though by now it was taking me towards him. I was aware of a horrible pain in my throat, far too intense to be dreamt. It felt as if I was being strangled. I was starting to lose consciousness. In my dream, I was starting to die. I woke up sharply with a howl because my cat had bitten me on the face. He leapt off me as soon as my eyes opened and sat on the floor beside the bed, haunches raised, hair on end, making a low rasping growl. I touched my cheek. I was bleeding where he'd bitten me. My cat is a big softy. Not only has he never bitten or scratched me, but he's never bitten or scratched anyone, not even my ex, who had hated him and who often used to shove him off chairs and tabletops with rather more force than was strictly required. But he'd bitten me awake. He'd known something was wrong. I stumbled into the bathroom to try and clear up the mess. It hurt a lot, but nowhere near as much as being strangled by an invisible force had. I tried not to think, and would probably get infected if I didn't douse it in TCP. I was badly rattled, so once I'd stuck a plaster over it, I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of non-caffeinated tea. I went back to my bedroom and tried to soothe my freaked-out cat, so it was a little while before I thought to check my phone. One message left at 5:16 a.m. from the sleep lab. Patient A was dead. We shut the experiment down after that. Patient A, recorded as in excellent health. Captain of the university track team, a young, vibrant, clean-living man, had died of a heart attack in his sleep. Acting under orders from my supervisor, I interviewed both B and C about what had happened in their dreams. The police had taken care of their waking life statements. B's was harrowing. She'd been aiming for Ava Gardner. She hadn't got her, and the person she'd got, a man with a crooked tooth and exhausted eyes, wouldn't stop. I didn't like to ask much more than that. I knew it wasn't just a nightmare. I knew how real he felt. C hadn't entered the room. C tended to start her dreams outdoors and would have to create a building with a door for her to enter. She didn't create one, but there was a building there when she started dreaming, and she walked away from it. As she walked, buildings started to mushroom up, crowd in on her. What had started as bucolic landscape rapidly changed into a silent, empty city. She refused to enter a single door. As she walked, she said she could feel faces, or rather, the same face, peering through the windows at her, locked in its grimace of pure hatred. She never looked at it directly. She kept walking, even as the streets narrowed and the buildings became more decrepit. She walked until she found the road ended in an alleyway with a single squat building at the end, a door ajar. She turned and tried to leave, but no matter which direction she turned, she was at the end of an alley, and the only way forwards through the door. Fortunately, a strange word to use in the circumstances, the furore around A's sudden death woke her up. I emailed my write-up of the reports to my supervisor, and he emailed back almost immediately, asking to see me. He was in his office, filling out paperwork. I'd assumed it would be insurance paperwork, following the death of a patient in the lab, but it wasn't. It was funding paperwork. I am sorry to say that I read it upside down. I was rattled, in pain, and tired. I snapped at him. You can't seriously be thinking of applying for funding for another year, after this? He sighed deeply. Angrily, I continued. A man has died. He calmly looked at me, then said, and without this funding, the department will die. My job, your job, the postdocs, the junior professors, the students, all of them done for. The university hasn't budgeted for us because they're expecting us to apply for the endowment. My face scrunched. They haven't budgeted for us? I spluttered. Why wouldn't they budget for us? We're part of the university. He gave me a long, slow look. It's a little different here to what you're used to, he said, rather coolly, and I flushed. I don't want to boast, but I got my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees from some quite prestigious universities which, yes, do have a lot of money. I wasn't expecting to land a job in bumfuck nowhere, but the endowment had made this department rich, and that had attracted the best researchers, and, well, I'd gone through a breakup, and here I was. I was aware that my interdepartmental nickname was the Toff. I preferred it to the earlier posh cunt. So I was a bit too flustered to say anything and looked down at the paperwork again. One of the pieces of paper was headed the John Riney Foundation and had a little picture of the man I presumed was John Riney. It must have been an official photo taken for an undergraduate student card. He was beaming against a professional photographer's blue background, wearing a plain green sweater. Even upside down, I could see that he had a crooked front tooth. In that young, happy, open face, it looked rather charming. I felt a wave of nausea rise up through me and had to steady myself on the edge of the desk. My supervisor saw the stagger and followed the line of my gaze. Oh, yes, the endowment. Poor John. I was a postdoc when he died, not an experiment I was working on, thankfully. It reminds me a bit of this situation. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. I was remembering the John Riney of my dreams, with his exhausted insomniac's eyes. He came here to have his insomnia cured. What? My supervisor looked rather startled. Oh, I suppose this was a long time before. Number John Riney was a perfectly healthy lad. He was part of an early experiment on lucid dreaming, back when we were trying to work out how to measure lucid dreaming at all. You know, they used to think it was self-mythologized, like they used to think about female ejaculation. Anyway, the process wound up giving him severe insomnia, and you know as well as I do what lack of sleep can do to a person. This was like nothing we'd ever seen. He'd go without sleep for weeks at a time. Awful stuff. He killed himself in the end. Killed himself, I repeated weakly. Yes, said my supervisor solemnly. A terrible shame. His parents set up the foundation which gives us the endowment. It's nice, in a way. Actually, when you think about it, he lives on through our dreams. I left the office without saying anything. We broke for Christmas. I haven't slept properly for nearly 5 days because I don't want to sleep deeply enough to get to REM sleep. Dream sleep always comes after deep sleep, and the largest quantity of REM sleep comes in the last couple of hours of a night. But I can feel my eyelids drooping even as I type. I can't sleep. I can't sleep. I can't sleep. I mustn't. Oh God, I need to sleep. Please, help me. Story 3: Deeper Than Dreams. A while back, I came across some online communities for lucid dreaming. For those who don't know, lucid dreaming is the act of becoming self-aware in your dreams, and even being able to manipulate them. You can go wherever you want to, summon whatever objects you like, interact with whomever you want, and so on. It took weeks of practice and dream journaling, but I still remember the first time I succeeded. I ended up flying around my home in downtown Salt Lake City, kissing an old girlfriend, and driving a Bugatti Veyron down the Autobahn. I didn't lucid dream again until about a week later. That time, I was more adventurous, meeting up with characters from my favorite Walter Moore's books, rendezvousing with some female celebrities I won't name. If it isn't apparent, I'm pretty lonely. And then flying a bus into the sun because I wanted to see what would happen. The sun exploded. As time went by, my lucid dreams became more frequent, and I became almost perfectly capable of controlling them. Monster trucks, alien worlds, movie stars, famous characters, whatever I could imagine. Sounds awesome, right? Well, after the 5th or 6th time, I made a disheartening discovery. Lucid dreaming was becoming an empty experience. The novelty had worn off, only to reveal that the more I knew I was in a dream, the less fun everything became. I knew that whatever I did or saw wasn't real, so any gravity of excitement I might have felt disappeared. The beautiful women were just shells without souls. The landscapes were like paintings that, while striking, were only shades of the things they represented. Lucid dreaming became like trying to take a bite out of raspberry sherbet, only to realize that you were eating unflavored cream, bland and unfulfilling. Unsatisfied with lucid dreaming, I started to research everything about dreams from any source available. Science, pseudoscience, paranormal theories, world religions, you name it. One evening, as I was reading something from Dr. Stephen LeBurge, I was struck by a thought. What if lucid dreaming wasn't the limit to dreams? Maybe I could go deeper. To what, though? I could only guess. Nobody online seemed to have any answers to that. Since I couldn't think of anything else to do, I started meditating every day. Ironically, my dreams became more uncontrollable. I retained my awareness, but I would will certain things to happen and they wouldn't, or things and creatures I hadn't thought of would appear, and when I tried to will them away, they didn't leave. Still, I kept going. One night, as I dreamt of walking the crowded streets of Chicago, I had an idea. Perhaps I could meditate in my dream. I'd only ever done it awake. So, I sat down on the sidewalk as crowds of people who didn't exist passed around me. I closed my eyes, concentrated on my breathing, and tried emptying my thoughts. Suddenly, my body started to feel heavier and heavier. Though I stayed the same size, I started to feel like I weighed twice as much, then 4 times, then 8. Soon I felt as heavy as a truck. It became unbearable. I couldn't move any of my frame under the weight, and I realized that I couldn't breathe. I started to panic. I opened my eyes, gasped for air, and tried to move, and then I woke up. Whatever that had been, it felt 100 times more real than any lucid dream. I decided to keep pushing. For months, whenever I would find myself in a lucid dream, I would sit down and meditate. I could go longer and longer each time, my body feeling heavier and heavier, but it would eventually become so unbearable that I would wake up. Why did I feel heavier? What was I getting into? I could only guess. But I persisted, until last night. I was dreaming about hiking the sandier mountains of New Mexico. Like several times before, I sat and started meditating. My body became heavier, but I could take it. I became even heavier. I could take it still. Soon I weighed as much as a truck, as a tractor, as a whale, as a skyscraper. I'd never gone this far. Suddenly, I started to feel a pulling sensation, like my entire body was being tugged at from all different directions. This was new. My stomach sank as fear started to crawl through my chest. I almost wanted to move, to make it stop, but my arms weighed as much as cities. I couldn't breathe anymore. The pulling started to tear me apart from the inside. I started to black out, and I was standing in a vast, grey field. The grass below my feet was dead. It crunched as I stepped around. Above me was an infinite black sky, swirling with wispy, blood-red clouds. I could see shining galaxies and dimly twinkling stars. Whether it was night, or whether I stood in a plane that gazed directly into the cosmos, I couldn't tell. Suddenly, I heard a scream in the distance. I turned, and it took me a moment to register what I saw. There were thousands of heads, stretching all the way to the horizon, all sticking out of the ground, and from the top of each head a glowing, ethereal-looking thread sprouted and stretched upward. I craned my head up and saw that the thread stretched all the way up into space until they disappeared from view. Every once in a while a head screamed, and it made my blood run cold. He came closer. At first, I thought he was going to try and shove me into the ground with the rest of the people, but he merely kept inspecting the sleepers. Gathering my thoughts, I paused, then asked, "Why does your face—" I was cut off. "My face is fine," the man huffed. "Not my fault if your mind can't make sense of it." I was a bit taken aback by the man's rudeness, but I asked him his name anyway. "Morpheus, the Sandman, the dream catcher. You pick," he shrugged. "What are you doing?" I asked hesitantly. He looked at me, then said matter-of-factly, "I'm saving us all." "Saving us?" I echoed. "Yup," he confirmed. "Saving us from what?" I pressed. "Them," he said, and pointed up into the dark sky. I gazed above me. All I saw were red clouds in front of the endless black abyss of space. The man continued his walk, checking out threads. Rather than being left behind in this alien place, I followed him. From somewhere in the distance came the scream of a woman. Confused, I said, "I don't see anybody up there." He glanced back to me. "And they don't see you. Let's keep it that way." "Really?" I asked. "Why?" He continued walking whilst he responded, "I know a lot of people say you don't want to know, but believe me, you don't want to know." "Humour me," I insisted. He sighed deeply. "I'll spare you the details. I've seen what they've done to other life forms, and it's not pretty. Suffice to say, they wouldn't like the idea of us sharing the same space they do." "What? Like we're trespassers on their property?" I asked. The man began eyeing a particularly thick thread above a young woman's head. "Like we're ants in their kitchen," he said. He readied the scissors. Then, with a swift motion, he closed the scissors around the young woman's thread. The thread, however, resisted. He gave it another try, but the thread remained uncut. I offered a suggestion. "Maybe you need new scissors." He scoffed. "Scissors. Is that what your brain is interpreting? Not too far off, metaphorically." The man took a deep breath as he readied the scissors around the young woman's thread again. I looked at her face. Her black hair was braided, and her ebony skin and features reminded me of pictures of sub-Saharan women. Her face, however, was screwed in discomfort, her eyes scrunched tightly shut. With a mighty grunt and heave, the man tried the scissors again. This time the thread gave. It faded as the young woman's face relaxed, but returned sooner than the old woman's had. I'm hoping that's enough to stop this one, he said, wiping his brow. But a stubborn enough mind can overcome any barriers the brain puts up against it for its own good. You've been a headache and a half the last while, let me tell you. I bet you anything this young lady is the next one to come bother me. Incredulously, I asked, "Are you erasing people's dreams?" He looked at me approvingly. Smart lad. Most people erase their own dreams, the ones that need erasing, but I'm helping the stubborn ones along. I still wasn't entirely certain what was going on, but I tried to keep the conversation going, and by you erasing dreams, that is saving us all. You got it, he confirmed. I thought he might add to that, but he returned to wandering through the field of heads. I kept following him. And how exactly does that work? I asked. He squatted to inspect a man's head, and without looking up at me, he responded, "Well, since you asked, most dreams and nightmares are the leftovers of your brain working while you sleep, but not all dreams. Some reach out to them," he said whilst pointing upwards, then continued, "Getting horrible glimpses of what's out there. Oh, you can't comprehend what you're seeing and feeling, of course. Like a termite doesn't understand a volcanic eruption. But you know it's bad. Your brain can't handle it. So it erases your memory of the dream when you wake up, and you're able to continue with your day instead of crawling into a corner and going insane." Defensively, I said, "I don't remember having any sorts of dreams like what you mentioned." "Exactly," he replied. Evidently satisfied, he left the thread above the man's head alone. "Problem is," he added, wiping his brow again, "if too many of those outreaching dreams go unchecked, especially the dreams of persistent fools like yourself, it could alert them, and we don't want that." I had to know more. I persisted with that line of questions. "You've got to tell me, who are they?" Suddenly, there was a rumbling from the sky. The man and I looked up. In the infinite sky, one of what I had assumed were galaxies began to mutate. It began to turn different colors as cosmic tendrils started to emerge from it, stretching out heaven knows how many hundreds of light years. The rumbling was soon replaced with a roar, an eldritch cry, defying the vacuum of space like from the pits of 1,000 dying stars. All the people in the ground began screaming. Still, the cosmic tendrils grew longer in the sky. I could hear screams for miles and miles, from thousands of people, all with their eyes tightly closed. My word, the screams. If you've never heard a crowd of people screaming, I can promise you there is nothing like it. It will never leave you. I heard the man mutter to himself, "I thought about them too much. I shouldn't have thought so much." And for the first time, I detected a hint of fear in his voice. "Kid, start thinking about something else. Movies or women or whatever." I sure tried. The man began to take measured breaths. We stood there for a few minutes, but soon the roaring died off. The screams of the people in the ground became lesser and lesser, and soon the galaxy resorted back to its previous appearance. The man breathed a sigh of relief. Grimly, the man said, "That was a bad one. Plenty of people won't be remembering their dreams tonight." And after glancing one more time into the sky, he resumed his seemingly endless task. For several minutes, I followed him in silence. I considered everything that I had seen and mulled it over. Finally, after much deliberation, I told him, "I want to learn everything." Even if I couldn't distinguish his features, I knew that he was looking at me like I was an idiot. "After that, you still want to know more?" he said incredulously. "I'm not going to tell you any more, because I promise you, you'll be happier not having the knowledge." "Why not?" I insisted. "How do you think I got stuck here, wise guy?" he breathed scathingly between his teeth. "If you want to be trapped here for eternity, fine, I'll tell you everything, only you don't seem great company. So, Is that what you want? To be trapped here until the universe falls in on itself, or until we're all devoured? I allowed that it wasn't. Well, I continued, is there anything more you could safely tell me? He sighed, wearily, then responded, if it'll get you to shut up, I've got something I could show you. Don't know if you'll remember it when you wake up. That's a decision you'll have to make for yourself in a bit. You're probably too far in for your subconscious to do that for you. I'll remember it, I assured him. I've already made that decision. The man chuckled dryly. Don't make promises you're not sure you can keep. The man put down his scissors. He brought his hands up next to his ears, and slowly he began to peel away his face. I woke up in a cold sweat. My sheets were soaked in what I hoped was just my own perspiration. I looked at my phone. It was 4 a.m. For hours I lay there, but there was no way I could go back to sleep the way my mind was racing. So I pulled up my laptop and wrote this. I've racked my brain. I've meditated. I've done everything I can think of, but no matter what, I just can't remember what I saw when the man peeled away his face. Story 4. My Recorded Dreams. The adrenaline surged through me, strong, but not fear. Not yet. I was intrigued. The options were laid out in a simple list. It read, video of every dream you have ever had, from age 3 onwards, $99.99. Video of every memory you have, including forgotten and damaged memories, the next one said, $999.99. Video of every daydream or fantasy you have ever had from age 2 onwards, continued the list, $9,999.99. Audio of every thought you have ever had, it went on, $19,999.99. A transcript of every word and sentence you have ever spoken, the final option stated, $29,999.99. I had enough money for the video recording of my dreams, so I bought it and eagerly waited for the team to show up. The team was part of a company named Disinter. I discovered them after a bored search about the science of dreaming, which led me down a rabbit hole of people discussing dreams they had that happened to have occurred in real life afterwards. Far down that rabbit hole was a user on a forum who mentioned Disinter, an obscure company that was supposedly able to record just about anything from a conscious brain. It didn't ask for any bank information, and they had multiple video files of proof that could only be produced by high-tech government technology. When the team showed up, we greeted each other. They were friendly, enthusiastic, and chill to be around. I won't go into detail though, as that's not what's important. They put a white MRI-like machine on my head, and after a few minutes of sitting absolutely still, the machine was lifted and the team promised they'd send me MP4 files with my recorded dreams in them. A rush of intrigue washed over me, but there was also a pinch of unease. Dreams can be absolutely random, and the contents seem normal to us only when we're in the dream. So would I be watching a ton of uncanny-looking creepy stuff in real life? I decided that couldn't be the case half the time, at the very least, and waited patiently for the email. A few days later, it arrived. Your dreams are here. A rush of excitement ran through me, and I opened the email right then. There were 288 attachments. Each one was labeled with a different time period. The first one was labeled September 13th, 2005 to September 23rd, 2005, which, as promised, was exactly 3 years after I was born. I scrolled down to the bottom. Surely enough, the last attachment was titled December 28th, 2022 to January 4th, 2023. I clicked the first attachment. The first dream was of everything being blurred out, as if being censored. Child me looked around, and I watched as I was pretty much seeing my childhood home again, and from my own perspective, although it was all blurry. Still interesting nonetheless. Nothing to be concerned about, though, as most of the dreams that followed took place in my childhood home. Things like old toys were interesting to see again. Other toys I couldn't recognize, so I wasn't sure if I made them up or not. And some toys were distorted shapes of random different colors and blurry, formless variations of the same thing. In the one named October 7th, 2006 to October 17th, 2006, the seventh dream began in the dark. What's happening here? A night light came into view. Oh, this is me in my bedroom at night, I'm guessing. The sound of the living room clock ticking. For some reason, it was nostalgic. But then there was a sound. It sounded like a thwomp, but muffled. This was one of my childhood nightmares. The POV looked at the nightlight. A hand covered it and brightened it, revealing a silhouette of an arm. Child me followed the arm and noticed a silhouette of a man. It was still. Child me stared at it. I knew what he was feeling. I remember this very dream. I was frozen, adrenaline rising. I wanted him to leave. I couldn't leave as my reaction was to freeze. Watching this dream, remembering having it myself, I knew what was coming next. The silhouette's mouth opened, revealing a simplistic bright red covering the lower half of its face. It wasn't so creepy watching it in the present day, but when I was a kid, it sent me shivering. Watching it back was like a form of closure. I wasn't afraid of it anymore, so I felt safe. That's not to say I didn't have any nightmares that stick with me to this day. Around the 2-hour mark in the recording titled April 13th, 2007 to April 23rd, 2007, the scenery changed to that of an office filled with thick, dark smoke. Computers and papers were strewn all over the floor. The smoke hung over me. This was a recurring nightmare of mine. This one still sends chills up my spine. I was cold watching it play out. Child me looked around until he found a door. They sprinted up to the door and turned the knob, but it didn't move. Watching the dream in the present, I knew what was going to happen next. My breathing had become shallow. Child me looked behind him. A group of tall windows lined up the wall across the room. As Child me stared at the windows, a series of screams came from the hallway. They became distorted, sending chills down my spine as I watched on. These were creepy screams I hadn't heard in over a decade. I almost skipped through the video to avoid hearing them for any longer, but I needed closure. My child self looked around at all the debris on the ground. Some of the computers were misshapen, some looked glitched out, some were more rectangular, others were missing their back half. It was also odd how clear what I was watching was. It was in the highest quality I've ever watched anything in. The smoke began to surround Child me, even obscuring the floor. As far as I remembered, he had no idea where to go. He stumbled around, waving his hands around as if it would help with the smoke. As he walked around, he eventually fell through the smoke. Falling from a great height terrified me when I was a kid, let alone being in a burning room or entire building. I would freeze thinking about it. Watching this dream, my stomach tightened. I turned my head away, but continued to watch the video with my peripheral vision. It was a dream, but ideas are still impactful. Also, there should be more careful approaches to bringing up certain events to kids. You probably think I woke up during the fall, but unfortunately, I didn't. The ground got closer. My stomach tightened more as I watched the ground get closer. Child me hit the ground. Face against the pavement. Faint sirens and sad saxophone lounge music blared from all directions. From what I remember, I couldn't move. Child me audibly hyperventilated and began to cry. I'm just glad I didn't yet know the true effects of falling from great heights. Instant death, liquefaction, a huge mess on the ground. Stuff you never want to see, I found. I had the dream again in July 2007, with little difference. Once more in October 2007, with the only difference being that I was able to turn my head and see black buildings, firefighters, and paper. Then I had multiple flashes of the dream throughout 2008. I couldn't recall these flashes myself, but they were clear as day in the recordings. They always took place in that office. Everything was arranged differently each time, aside from one computer always having a cracked screen with the exact same color-distorted picture. The only time I remembered having the dream in 2008 was in September of that year. Even then, it was practically the same. Terrifying to me then, still terrifying to me now, especially when watching it back. All the distorted and misshapen objects, less clutter than what would make sense. And eerie moments of silence sent more chills down my spine. Most of the dreams were random scenes with blurred or distorted objects in random scenes. I'd be in my kitchen, looking through the windows and seeing a purple sky, copies of one house sitting beside each other, no fence, absolutely no sound whatsoever. Then I'd be in a room that looked to be like a mash-up of my childhood bedroom and my current bedroom, complete with a bathroom sink with no faucet. Then I'd be in my 12th grade math class. The teacher is an unrecognizable man wearing white clothes decorated with random grey splotches. Most of my classmates have elongated faces with irregular shaped mouths, no lips, and no noses. Some of them are classmates I had in that class in real life. At least, they looked normal. There were also 1 or 2 classmates who looked normal as well, but I couldn't recognize them at all. I'd look at a piece of paper on my desk. Random symbols were all that was on it. I'd look up at the ceiling, then back down at the paper. The top of the page then had the school district logo, name of the school, and my name printed on it. The rest of the page then had random words for sentences all over it. I'd try to read it, but the page would be lifted off of my desk. I'd look up and see a boy my age with an oval-shaped head and black curly hair holding the page, then tearing it up a few times and laughing. Okay then. That's really how it was with the dreams. There was no actual plot, just random settings with random objects and a lot of misshapen, cloned and distorted stuff, be it objects, animals, or people. I didn't even remember most of the dreams I was watching. Another thing I noticed was that all my nightmares had a much more coherent storyline than my other dreams. One nightmare I watched back was from 2007. I was sitting on my bed, looking towards my door when a dark, human figure with charred-colored skin and a messed-up face popped up. It had a squiggly mouth running from the top of his head down to his chin. A pit formed in my stomach as I watched. This dream was still unsettling and downright terrifying. I thought I had gotten over it by the age of 10. Child me looked to his left, only for another human figure to peer up from the side of his bed. It had dark red and somewhat purple skin, eyes without eyelids, and a V-shaped mouth with thin black lips. The pit in my stomach tightened as I continued to watch. It was very detailed. I wanted to skip through it. Child me looked down at his blanket. I skipped through the recording until I got to the next dream, which was of me eating pizza while a Rihanna song, weirdly set to the tune of an Aphex Twin song, played behind me. There was an odd period of time from around March 2009 through September 2013, in which, well, I'll just explain it head on. In one dream, I watched a video on YouTube of security camera footage showing a tall man in a suit following a shorter man around and standing still in his front yard for an hour. Watching the dream, I recognized the video. I had watched it back in 2014 and it gave me a load of chills then. Watching it again was just as chilling. Another thing I noticed was the YouTube logo in the dream was the post-2013 logo, and in the dream, child me peered at the upload date, March 17th, 2011. One thing confused me. The dream was part of the May 14th to May 24th, 2009 file. Somehow, I watched the security camera video in my dream years before I watched it in the real world. And I'm not misremembering anything either. Right after I watched the dream, I looked for the video on YouTube. When I found it, I compared it to the one in the dream recording. Same locations, same angles, same camera timestamps from 2011, same upload date, the same tall man was there, the same shorter victim was there. Everything. Maybe it was a mistake. There's no way I could see something in a dream before it existed in real life. Besides, in the dream, I was watching it on the computer in my childhood home, the home I lived in around 2009. In real life, I watched the video on a phone in an apartment, but then I watched a dream from a July 2009 file. A news report played on the TV showing a tsunami carpeting a field with a landfill of wood, trees, cars, and broken up houses. From the Pacific, the bottom headline read. This seemed quite vague, but I knew it was familiar. I pulled up videos of the 2011 Japan tsunami. I didn't expect to find it, but there it was. The exact video from the dream with the same details. Same field layout, same pieces of debris in the same spots. It gave me chills. In an October 2009 file, I sat in the passenger seat of a car going down an iced-up road. Child me spoke. I can't believe I'm in Russia. The driver's hand pointed towards a tail of light in the sky. The light dissipated, then an ear-puncturing loud bang erupted from the light's direction. Then I was reading a news article about a meteor exploding in the sky over Russia, with the publishing date just being early 2013. I felt as much as a small rush of adrenaline. How was I seeing this? In a March 2010 file, I was sitting on a roof in London, England, watching an apartment building burn. A news helicopter circled it, and the Big Ben clock stopped ticking. Chills ran down my spine watching the dream, as it reminded me of the fire in 2017. In an April 2011 file, I was walking down a hallway while wearing a medical mask and gloves. A voice spoke over the system. Please wait until further instructions are given. Child me walked into a room to the right. 3 women sat in the room. One on a chair, one stood beside a TV, and one was laying on a bed. Each of them wore masks and gloves. What's going on? Child me asked. Virus, the woman in the chair said. The woman on the bed uttered something, but I couldn't make out what it was. It didn't sound like a foreign language or even anything that would come from a human, or even an animal. She wasn't showing any signs of sickness. And the virus I suspected it was didn't have any such vocal symptom. It was a dream though, so there's that. The woman beside the TV said, "Stay away." Then a man spoke over the PA system again. Today is March 12th, 2020. COVID-19. But his words trailed off into gibberish. 2020. That's 9 years away. I'm in the future. Hopefully this virus doesn't kill everybody. Hopefully they make a cure. Child me said. I felt frozen in confusion and amazement. I couldn't recall this dream, or any of the predictive dreams I had watched so far. In a November 2012 file, Child Me was walking throughout his home, in which everything had a shiny glow. He opened the door, revealing a hideous sight. The trees standing around the houses across the street were infested with little black creatures the size of leaves. Every window on the 4 houses I could see were boarded up. A pale white human head was sticking out of a storm drain, and little holes were forming on the road. Out of each of them came 10-foot-long centipedes that squirmed off in all directions. An intense sinking feeling overcame me. I remembered the dream. It was a nightmare that plagued my mind for days afterwards, and had given me a fear of holes for a month. The head still gave me a sinking feeling. The centipede still gave me chills. One thing I remembered about the dream were symbols in the sky that looked like a code. Watching the sky in the recording, because I was too creeped out to look anywhere else, the code slowly popped up. It was familiar, but the type of code it was has escaped me. As I stared on, a dark red circular object hovered by and stopped above the doorstep. Oh yeah, this guy. An eye popped out from the underside of it. It had a brown pupil that glanced towards child me and just stared. Another pit formed in my stomach. It's difficult to describe how uncanny and realistic this thing looked. How the eye was part of it and somehow bigger than it. Child me looked at the road. The ground began to shake. More centipedes crawled out of the holes. Then the head in the drain sunk out of view. It looked as if it had been pulled down by someone or something. I didn't want to stick around to watch some realistic-looking freaky stuff, so I skipped through the video, looking forward to a complete scenery change. I hope that dream wasn't a predictive one. Maybe it was some random stuff put together in anticipation of the supposed Mayan apocalypse, but it all stood out so weirdly. I never had a dream like that one before or since then. There was no indication of when the scene took place. The architecture of the homes reminded me of the homes around the northeastern US that were built in the 1970s. It couldn't be far into the future. The adrenaline is rising. When and where did that dream take place? Maybe the creepy things in that scene were localized to that area only? I can't be sure, unfortunately. It's all speculation. The final predictive dream was of large cartoon-like bombs, with the Russian and old Soviet flags falling down on Ukraine during the winter. It's probably obvious what that was predicting. After getting to the end of a December 2014 file, I was exhausted. By that time, I had dedicated a few hours each day for 3 days to watch a bunch of the dreams from each file. I closed the file I had open and checked the time. 1:30 a.m. I had no idea it was that time already. I shut my laptop off, then I went to bed. I promised myself I'd take a lot more time to process all of what I had been watching at some point in the future. The next morning, I woke up with somebody's arm around me. It was rotten green and white, and its smell... I covered my nose to block it out. I pushed the arm off me and looked to my left. A rotted face with dangling skin and missing eyes laid on the pillow beside mine. I froze. What the hell is this doing here? How did it get here? When did it get here? After a minute of cold feelings, I looked towards the door. As I turned my head, I swear I saw its head move. That shit didn't just move, did it? I was about to jump off my bed and run, but a breathy, throaty, weak voice hit my left ear. Help us. We're contacting you using the most advanced measures possible for us. We first contacted you 10 years ago. Help us. Chills ran down my spine. That hellish-looking thing was alive. I could only associate something like this with wild hallucinations. However, I hadn't ever had a wild hallucination before. Maybe I was dreaming. I laid back down in my spot, resting my head on the pillow, and facing away from that horrible thing that was somehow alive despite its physical condition. 10 minutes later, its presence vanished. I had woken up from whatever that dream was all about. I looked to my right and there was a crease in the bed, as if someone had been laying there. I didn't want to entertain the thought I may need to go to a doctor, so I got up and did my usual morning routine. Afterwards, I sat down at my desk and started up my laptop. Once my notifications flooded in, one caught me off guard. January 5th, 2023 to January 15th, 2023. How? It's not like my dreams could have been recorded after the time I was visited by the team. I clicked on the file and a video started. I was walking down my home street, watching cars roll by. I skipped through the video and saw some familiar sights. I watched the running dream I had in the middle of last week. I watched the white lines in the sky dream I had on Saturday. I realized these were the dreams I had over the 10 days after the 4th. But how? They were never recorded. But they were recorded anyway, somehow. I skipped through the rest of the video and watched every dream I had that morning while thinking about sending a message to the company. After the video ended, I wrote up a message asking them how I got my most recent dreams despite not getting them recorded by the team after having them. While waiting for them to respond, my heart dropped. The zombie dream wasn't in the recording. I went back and skipped to the end. I was standing on a beach covering my nose with my hand. The picture faded to white. Then the video ended. That was indeed what I was dreaming right before waking up to see the arm and smell the body's terrible odor. But where was it? The dream about the zombie wasn't there. I sent Disinter a second message asking about the missing zombie dream. An hour later, I got a response to both my question about the extra recording and the missing zombie dream. We thought you might appreciate it. Some of your dreams are very unique. Especially 11242-012, Bright Home Dark Reality 04:2-3S. And so it's amazing that we could have you as a client. We're sharing with you weekly recordings of all your dreams for the foreseeable future. Thank you. It continued. Every piece of content in our recordings is unedited, preserved, and the content is owned by you. Anything not included in our recordings was a real-world event. If you believe you recall a dream that wasn't included in the recordings, make sure you A. have watched the recordings all the way through, B. double-check by watching the recordings all the way through a second time, C. consider you may have misremembered a past event as a dream, D. consider you may have imagined a dream you have misconstrued as a dream you had in actuality. 2 weeks later, I revisited the late November 2012 file, scanned until the mentioned title appeared, Child Me in a Bright Home, opening the door to the twisted scene. That dream. Why so interesting? So many questions that need answering. But I need to continue on with my usual business right now. After that, I'm going to give myself a lot more time to process all the dream stuff. I don't want to watch certain dreams again. I may even avoid opening the files those dreams are in, despite the dozens of lighter dreams that accompany them. I'm just going to think about what all of this might mean. Well, out of what I watched, anyway. There are dozens of files that I haven't opened yet, and I don't feel very eager to. What if I think a dream about me dying is foretelling something? This was exciting at first, but now I'm overwhelmed with confusion, amazement, and the creeps. I can't recall watching the nightmares without being overwhelmed with chills. I can't recall the predictive dreams without wondering how the hell I got information beforehand, then becoming overwhelmed with the unknown and a ton of anxiety about the future. Don't get me started on where the hell that zombie came from and whether or not it's going to come back. A pit formed in my stomach just talking about it. I'm very creeped out. I just noticed something on my sock. It looks like rotted flesh. Damn it. I don't want to have to move away from here, but I might be left with no choice. Story 5. The Shared Dream. I read once that dreams shouldn't be taken seriously, that they're nothing but our unconscious mind interpreting random brain activity which happens naturally during sleep. But if all that noise and color and life is just coming from my brain, then how can two people share the same dream? I didn't recognize the other person in my dream, but I saw him in such vivid detail that it was hard to imagine him not being real. I'd guess he was about my age, in his late 20s, thick, curly brown hair, with broad, blue-tinged glasses perched upon a wide nose. His face was covered in rough black stubble which progressed part way down his neck. I could see every individual hair, the pores of his skin, and the slight chip on one of his front teeth. I could see him in such detail because in my dream I was standing directly over him while he lay in a shallow pool of water, just deep enough to cover his face. His eyes were open, and I remember that he tried to speak to me, but the water filled his mouth, and I couldn't understand what he was trying to say. Logically, he should have stood up if he wanted to talk, and logically, I should have helped him up if I wanted to listen. But it was a dream, so I just kept asking him to repeat himself, and he just kept on trying to talk, growing more and more frustrated the longer this went on. It wasn't until I was about to wake up that I realized my foot was on his chest, and that I'd been holding him down the whole time. The dream dissipated within moments of waking, as usually happens with me, and I didn't think anything more of it until noon the next day. That's when I saw the same man, looking exactly as I dreamt him, except that his face was cleanly shaven this time. I was walking with my boss down the hallway of my office building when he comes round the corner and passes us from the other direction. I guess I must have been staring a bit because he slows down as we pass. And for a moment we both stop in the middle of the hallway and stare at each other. I couldn't think of any pretense to talk to him though. It's a big company and most of us don't know the people who work in the other departments. Besides, my boss was with me. I didn't want to say anything weird, so I just kept walking. I did look back for a second before I turned the corner though, just to see that he was still standing in the middle of the hallway, still staring at me over his shoulder. By the end of the day, I'd decided that I was overthinking things. We worked at the same place, so I must have seen him once, and then forgotten until he showed up in my dream. And it didn't have to be weird. I'd probably look back too if someone was staring at me like I'd done to him. Fast forward to the next night when I had the same dream, only this time he was cleanly shaven, just like I'd seen him last. He wasn't as calm this time either. He must have remembered that I was holding him down because he started thrashing in the water almost immediately. The water boiled and churned with the energy of his gargled shouting. I was afraid that if he got up, he'd attack me, so I did the only thing I could think of and held him down. I held him down, and I waited for what seemed like hours until his violent motions finally subsided. By the end of the dream, he wasn't trying to talk or move anymore, and when I woke up, I could still remember his sullen, angry glare. I was almost afraid to go to work the next day. It took an extra long shower for me to convince myself that I was being stupid. I usually have a pretty precisely timed morning routine, so that was enough to ensure I was late. My boss is pretty chill, and that wouldn't have been a big deal if it weren't for the guy waiting for me. I didn't see him until he rapped on my driver's side window with his knuckle shortly after I'd parked. We stared at each other through the window, which felt chillingly reminiscent of the thin layer of water which divided us in my dream. The same sullen glare, the same instinct that he was going to attack me the moment we stood on equal footing. But of course, this was the real world, and I'd already spent the whole morning convincing myself how stupid I was. So I took a deep breath and rolled the window down. "Yeah?" I asked him, trying to play it cool. "Do I know you?" "Why didn't you let me up?" he asks at once without the slightest pretense. "I was drowning, and you knew I wanted to get out of there, so why were you holding me down?" I couldn't decide whether to acknowledge that I knew what he was talking about. I wanted to tell him that it was just a dream, that I was scared, that it was somehow his fault for being underwater in the first place. I must have panicked, though, because the only thing I said was, "I don't know what the hell you're talking about." I tried to open my car door to get out, but the second it started to open, he slammed it shut again. His face was getting bright and flushed, and he looked equally capable of screaming at me or bursting into tears. "How's it feel being trapped, huh?" he said. I tried opening the door again, but it was my arm against his whole body weight, leaning against my car, and I couldn't budge him. I was drowning. I don't care why you were doing it, I just want to hear you say it. I want you to admit that you were doing it to me. He looked angry. I tried again to open the door, but it was pointless. I yelled, "You're crazy, man, get away from my car." I started to roll up my window. I wouldn't have to admit it if I could just wait him out. Sooner or later, someone else would come through the parking lot and they'd help me. They'd call security, he'd be dragged away, or fired. I didn't care what happened to him, as long as I didn't have to admit that I knew what he was talking about. His arm lashed out to block the closing window and he snatched at me. I just kept closing the window until it caught his arm to prevent him from getting me. I figured he'd retreat at the last second, but he didn't. His arm was caught by the rising glass, and his face kept getting redder. He started yelling and cursing, and then I was yelling, demanding he pull his arm out of there even though it must have been pinned. He wanted me to reverse the window, but I didn't because I knew he'd grab me the second he had the space to move. I was freaking out, and the only thing I could think to do was keep holding the button, putting more and more pressure on his arm until, all at once, the window shattered, 1,000 cracks and fractures appearing from nowhere. He screamed and ripped his arm away, and the whole window bent and wrenched free with him. A second later, we were staring at each other through the open window, him red-faced and snarling, and me terrified out of my mind. I hit the car into reverse and lurched out of the parking spot, not looking back until I was out onto the street. He wasn't chasing after me or anything, thank God, but I could still see him in the rearview mirror. I left him and my broken window in the parking lot and drove straight home, calling my boss to tell him I wouldn't be in that day. I've been pacing my room ever since I got home, unsure how I can ever go back to work and face him again. I'm seriously considering quitting my job, but I don't think that will even help, because whatever I do, I can't erase the last thing he shouted after me as I pulled out of the parking lot. "See you tonight, motherfucker."